welcome to episode 173 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I'm the father of a very special lady, the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And we are coming off of what I would consider a straightforward week, a week in which a lot of the quote-unquote right plays, the plays that made a lot of sense, went off. And when that happens, we see a lot of really sharp people at the top of the leaderboards. We see a lot of really sharp people crushing in cash, etc. You know, Gio Bernard, Todd Gurley, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, Marquise Goodwin all perform really well at high ownerships. And then some lower owned sharp plays, I thought, like Carson Wentz, Trey Burton, Russ Wilson, Adam Thielen, Hunter Henry, Kareem Hunt, all played really well. You know, I know there's people out there who disagree, but when we have plays like Gio to really loosen up the cap, I think that these are the best weeks, or at least my best weeks. These are the kind of weeks that I like to play in. First, there's the decision whether to play or to fade him in tournaments. But I think more importantly, like, we don't have to make these really thin decisions on crappy players. You know, like normally on DK, we're considering guys that I would just never want to play ever, but due to the tight nature of the salary cap, we have to. So, like, I'm not sitting there in a week when we have Gio Bernard at 3,100 and Josh Gordon at 5,500 or whatever, and Deshaun Kaiser or whoever else at, 4,900, Dak at 59 or 56 or whatever he was. We don't have to sit there and be like, should I play Jeremy Maclin this week? Can I play Cam Brate? Can I punt with DeMarcus Robinson? Like, the softer cap allows us to build through players we actually want to play, and we can make calls on players who may go under-owned often in the mid-range in weeks like this. So these are for sure my favorite kind of weeks to play. Speaking of, kind of soft caps and kind of auto plays like Gio at 3,100, there are always people in these kind of weeks who say, there's no edge. Everyone's going to have the same lineup. There's no point to even play cash. Even if every single person on DK Cash played Gio, I would disagree, but let's look at the numbers anyways. In the $25 single entry double up, the big $25 single entry double up on DK, Gio was only 82.4% owned. 18% of people were just starting their lineup drawing so slim. I didn't think DeAndre Hopkins was a must play at 8,500, but he was certainly really, really strong. Only 50.8% of people in that $25 big double up played him. Josh Gordon, 57%. Keenan Allen, 33%. Ty Gurley, 29%. So no, the truth is that not everyone will have the same lineup. And if we think it's so easy and so obvious to make the optimal cash team, then we should still be playing bigger. We should still be playing. And in fact, I would say that I would like to play bigger in those kind of situations. Make our opponents prove it. And I think you'd be surprised what you find. A couple other points from week 14. I want to touch on the weather. If you were on Twitter Sunday morning before lock, you saw these like absurd pictures from Buffalo before the Colts-Bills game. Like true blizzard conditions, feet of snow on the ground, terrible visibility, tons of wind. I think it was obvious this game was going to be severely impacted by the weather. So I know a lot of people's first instinct was to get in the Colts defense and get in the Bills defense. We've talked a ton on here about how the most important thing for a defense is getting a lot of opponent pass attempts. You just don't generate defensive scoring on DK by stuffing the run. Like, that just doesn't lead to sacks, doesn't lead to interceptions, doesn't lead to pick sixes, sack fumbles. So it was obvious, like, in these conditions up in Buffalo, that neither Nathan Peterman nor Jacoby Brissett were going to be throwing much at all. LaShawn McCoy ended up with 32 carries, Frank Gore 36 carries. So in games like that, I think people overreact a little bit to getting in. The defenses, obviously they played fine, okay, but I think the upside for defensive touchdowns was more limited. The other weather thing that came up ahead of week 14 was the wind in Cleveland. And I saw reports it was around 15, 16 miles an hour. I saw some reports 22 miles an hour. That's just typically how it is in Cleveland. And it was certainly a little scary, but I wanted to stick with Deshaun Kaiser in such a good spot, with all these weapons in one of the best possible matchups. I mean, let's think about what Deshaun Kaiser has now. Josh Gordon, Corey Coleman, Duke Johnson, David Njoku, really high rushing floor. So yeah, the wind is a concern, but like remember this game when we're thinking about weather in the future. Brett Hundley and Deshaun Kaiser, not exactly, Montana and Elway, combined to go 55 of 74 for 479 yards with 6 touchdowns. I mean, I'm not saying the wind is not a factor. It certainly is, but I'm trying to make a conscious effort not to overreact to weather, not blow up a team that I like because of weather, unless it's really extreme, like the Buffalo-Indianapolis situation. 2 more quick notes from week 14. First, I couldn't believe what the Lions did on defense. The Lions chose to use Darius Slay, their top shadow corner, on Deshaun Jackson. I mean, they left Mike Evans in one-on-one coverage, like even near the goal line against Nevin Lawson, and just like really bad secondary corners for the Lions. I don't know what's wrong with Mike Evans, but he was unable to produce. Like if you would have told me that Darius Slay was shadowing Deshaun Jackson in that game, I for sure would have had 100% Mike Evans. So really weird what's going on with Mike Evans in Tampa right now. Obviously, opponents are seeing it. They don't view Mike Evans as a weapon. Otherwise, they would have had Darius Slay on him. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Sterling Shepard situation. I ended up not playing Sterling Shepard in cash, but I played him a ton in other spots. And man, I don't know what happened. Played 77 of 80 snaps, ran a route on almost every one of Eli Manning's dropbacks. No Orlando Scandrick for the Cowboys, and still only saw 3 targets. I mean, Roger Lewis got like 11 targets. I have no idea. Haven't had a chance to go back and watch the game yet. I have no idea what happened. Don't think he was limited by his hamstring. Just a really weird thing. So I don't have any regrets on Sterling Shepard. I guess the only regret you could say is that when you have Eli Manning at quarterback who's playing at, league worst levels, it's a concern. I'd probably rather have Geno back there. But still, I still think Sterling was the right play, and for whatever reason did not work out. Other big thing I wanted to hit on was the tight end decision. So when we recorded the podcast, the 3-man last Thursday, the expectation was that Zach Ertz was going to play. He had gotten cleared from his concussion. Once it became clear that wasn't the case and Ertz was going to sit, I thought it was really close between Trey Burton and Steven Anderson. In the end, I decided to go with Burton in cash because I already had Lamar Miller, already had DeAndre Hopkins, and I think exposing myself to 3 Texans with Tom Savage at quarterback was just not something I was down for. So, although we knew that Trey Burton would share time with Brent Selleck, we also know he's super athletic and performed big time when given opportunities, even going back to the preseason. Anderson's profile and history is a bit thinner. And also, just from a game environment situation, that Eagles-Rams game, and also from a quarterback play consideration, Trey Burton obviously had the advantage there. So in the end, I don't think either one was a bad play. Anderson was actually in on 71% of snaps, ran 37 routes, got 6 targets. Trey Burton only played 51% of snaps, ran 32 routes, got 6 targets. Obviously, Burton was wildly more productive, which obviously has a lot to do, with his skill set and his quarterback, as I already mentioned. But anyways, that brings us to the 4-man and cash for this week. And I was able to book a win in the 4-man, ending the listeners' winning streak at 1. Key for me was kind of sticking with this wide receiver core, which I projected to get somewhere between 40 and 50 targets from. DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, AJ Green, Josh Gordon. Really easy to fit all 4 of those guys with Burton and Gio there. There were really no quarterbacks I wanted to spend up for. Considered Phillip Rivers, considered Alex Smith, but really came around on Deshaun Kaiser late in the week and felt really comfortable with his floor for reasons that I kind of already mentioned. So yeah, good week for me. And the big news is we have a lead in the 4-man. Standings are Adam 6 wins, Peter 5, Al 2, and the listeners 1. Speaking of the listeners, the Listener League was a 3,000 entry field filled Sunday morning. Be sure to get in early for week 15. If you would like to play, you go to DK Playbook, you find the logo for this podcast. Once you click on that, you will go to this podcast landing page. You'll see some videos. You'll see my face. I'm not wearing a hat today. I am disgusting. And you will see a link to the week 15 Listener League. Usually goes up Wednesday or Thursday. Winning the Week 14 Listener League was Seahawks fan 69. He played a full Eagles-Rams game stack. And I just want to say, for a game that had such a high total, for a game with so many offensive weapons, for a game that had some condensed target share with Robert Woods out again, this game was really under-owned across the board. Seahawks fan 69 got Carson Wentz at 3.8%, Trey Burton 10%, Nelson Aguilar 3%. Todd Gurley was obviously the chalk 38%, but then Cooper Kupp 1.8%. One thing on Trey Burton, I've talked about it a lot on this podcast, late news is always more valuable. So, the Zach Ertz was only doubtful. He wasn't ruled out. This news kind of came out late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. Always going to be more valuable in GPP. Late news will because he'll be less owned. Anyways, then Seahawks fan 69 brought it back with the chalk, DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Gordon, Gio Bernard. But he had a contrarian combo in there. Played a lot of chalk, but had a contrarian combo in there. Took down the Listener League. Willie will see him in the Week 15 4-man. In second place was R. Hess 13. He had Wentz, Burton, Gurley also, Gio, Nuke, and Gordon for the chalk. Then off the board a little bit with Frank Gore and Adam Thielen. My kind of favorite GPP pivot, talked about him in leverage, was Adam Thielen. Was so tilted when he dropped that first touchdown pass. Luckily came back and got another one. So really sharp play there, I thought, from our Hess 13 to play Adam Thielen. And then I don't know if he had Frank Gore in before the snow or not, but you could certainly project a higher volume of touches for Frank Gore once we saw the conditions. In third place was Sea Monster 1866. He also had Wentz, Burton, Alshon, Watkins, and Kupp. And then he played off the board Rod Smith at 0%. Not sure I've ever seen that. He was probably the only one to play him in the entire Listener League, so it doesn't even register on DraftKings. It's like 0.001% or something. Rod Smith at 0%, and Kareem Hunt, who, I expected the Chiefs to play well, and I'm a little bit frustrated with myself that I didn't play more Kareem Hunt. I expected the Chiefs to play well, and when they play well, when they have a lead, when they're in the red zone, Kareem Hunt is going to play well. It's when they get behind. It's when the defense is really struggling. It's when they're never moving the ball. They're not in the red zone. That's when Kareem Hunt ends up with these air balls. So, Kareem Hunt, sharp play, I thought. All right. Now let's move to everyone's favorite portion of the program, the listener questions. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. As always, appreciate all the questions. Got a lot of good ones. Only a few solo pods left. So if you want your question answered or at least considered, tweet it to @TheDFSEdge on Twitter. Question 1 is from Tim. He says, any advice for a lifelong Eagles fan? Could barely get out of bed this morning. Obviously, Tim is referring to the devastating Carson Wentz injury. Carson Wentz seems like a good dude. Seems like a legit good dude, unreal player. Actually, a few weeks ago, I was talking with some people, and I think that if you were starting a real life team right now from scratch, you would take Carson Wentz first overall. And obviously, you would take a quarterback first overall, and then you start looking at the ages of the elite quarterbacks and some aging curve stuff and ability. And Wentz is only 24. Now he has an ACL tear. And obviously that changes a lot. Will his mobility be compromised? He's been so elusive in the pocket, rolling away from the pass rush at 6'5", 230, like nobody I've seen. Running with reckless abandon. Will that change after the injury? Will he be less effective? It's certainly possible. And for that reason, maybe he's not the number 1 overall pick if you were starting from scratch right now. Just a devastating blow to the franchise. As for the fans, though, Tim, I don't know, man. Maybe I'm an asshole, but I really have no sympathy whatsoever for fans or Eagles fans. No one told you to get emotionally invested in something you have zero control over. You mean nothing to the Eagles outside of a paying customer. If they win, you didn't do anything. If they lose, you didn't do anything. It's just so wild to me to care so much about something you have nothing to do with, and you don't even get anything in return if they win. The Geno Smith death threat thing is just so mind-boggling to me. Maybe this is harsh. I'm sure I'm offending a lot of people, but I'd say my advice to you, Tim, was just don't get invested in teams as a fan. You can get invested in players that you like. And I'll say this, you can get invested in experiences, like it's fun to go through the experience with like fans and friends and stuff, watch games together, go to games together, talk about moves together, what the team should be doing. That's all fun. I get it. But like really like feeling bad or feeling angry because Wentz tore his ACL, meh. Question 2 is from Ben Guthrie Stewart. It says, you've talked about how future generations will view eating animals. How do you think they will view football? He says, I was thinking about it after the Ryan Shazier and other injuries last Monday night. Yeah, it's crazy, man. When I was a kid and we were growing up, there was one of my friends, his mom wouldn't let him play football, like ever. And I thought she was just like the biggest psycho, the biggest overprotective, like loser mom ever. And now fast forward 25 years, and there's no one I would know who would let their kid play football, myself included. I was kind of on the fence for a while, but yeah, I think that now it's pretty clear that it's just, just don't want your kid out there. I think it's hard to zoom out on things when you're in the moment, right? Like the Romans didn't think that the gladiator games were barbaric. Like at one point, jousting was super popular. Bullfighting was super popular. I know bullfighting is still going on, but certainly not nearly as popular as it once was. Eventually, I'm sure that football will sputter out, just like most other sports. I mean, think about it, like how early we are in the age of modern sport. There's only been 51 Super Bowls ever in the history of the world, only 51 Super Bowls. Like if NFL football goes on for 200 years or 250 years or 300 years, it's still such a small, kind of glimpse in history. So yeah, when people look back 2,000 years from now, much like we view cavemen and the gladiators and medieval times as absurd, 2,000 years from now, I think people will view our society similarly absurd. Definitely when it comes to sports and the treatment of animals, that's just life. That's just the way that the world works. Question 3 is from Rborg26. He says, thoughts on sex in a movie theater? Yeah, my first thought is just jealousy. That's really all that comes to mind. Jealousy and envy. Sex in movie theater sounds awesome. I certainly don't have the balls to do it. Like too much noise, afraid of getting caught, afraid of offending fellow moviegoers. I'm sure there's, plenty of cool DFS players out there that have done this. But, I do think that much wilder, like sexual activity is going on out there these days. And I think the internet has a ton to do with it. Like kids are learning stuff. Kids are taking pictures of stuff. People are doing absurd things via technology. I mean, I'm not on Snapchat, but I presume like its sole purpose is for dick pics, right? Like why else would you have something that gets deleted so fast? But, kids in high school are doing stuff that we, when I was in high school in the 90s, like we would never, ever dream of. And like, I can't even get into it. My wife actually has a half sister. She's like, I don't know, 22 now. But when she was in high school, she would tell me about these absurd things that kids were doing at her high school. Things called the lipstick game, things called a game called Smiles. I mean, these games are so absurd that I can't even describe them on here. Like literally, I wouldn't feel comfortable describing them on here. So yeah, in general, just jealousy, man. That's what comes to mind. Question 4 is from Michael Maggio. He says, do you ever feel the need to be contrarian to yourself in cash? Listeners know your likes. So I know that a lot of listeners and like people that follow me on Twitter like to play me in head-to-head. And that's totally fine. I love that, right? It's cool. I'm happy to step in the ring with listeners. It's fun. Blah, blah, blah. That said, I would never, ever try to be contrarian in cash. I think that's just a huge, huge mistake that people are still making out there. We've seen a lot in the format. People just doing really weird stuff, accepting low floor plays in cash just to try to be different. And I mean, that's really like one of our biggest edges in cash. People rostering guys with a really wide range of outcomes at a high cost. People trying to get fancy with sneaky plays when really they come with a lot of downside. So no, never feel the need to be contrarian in cash, no matter who I'm playing against. Michael Maggio. Question 5 is from Peter Montefusco. He says, what is the cutoff for getting food from a restaurant before it closes? Can I get Chipotle at 9:45 if they close at 10? Interesting question. I've actually thought about this a lot. I think there is a big difference between somewhere like Chipotle, where the food is already made, it's just sitting there, there's no waiters, there's no real cooks, right? There's a big difference between that and a restaurant where if someone comes in 15 minutes before close, you have a ton more work, past your end time work. Waiters have to serve you, cooks have to make the food, bartender has to stay longer. I mean, you're just asking for your food to be messed with at that point. I actually think there's a movie that features something about this. It's called Waiting with Ryan Reynolds. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I mean, I would not go into like a nice restaurant or anything, any like kind of place and ask for a full meal 15 minutes before it closed. Just no way. And it's not because like my top priority is to be a nice guy or whatever. My priority is not to get my food messed with. Just selfish reasons, as always, for me. Question 6 is from Joseph Staropoli. He says, when making GPP lineups, is it a terrible idea to leave a few thousand on the table? I say this because whenever I have money left over, I find myself moving off Devontae Adams, for example, and going up a couple thousand to a wide receiver that scores less, like Julio, just to spend the money. Yes, Joseph, it is a terrible idea to lose 1,000 or a few thousand on the table. As I've said before on here, I think 300 to 400 is the max I would leave on DraftKings in an NFL lineup. The idea isn't just to spend money to spend it, right? It's to legit upgrade to better plays. So we don't just go to Julio in a tough matchup against the Saints if we don't really want to. We can rework the whole lineup to get all plays in that we like. I think last week I talked about starting lineup construction with kind of by putting all the cheapest guys that we'd be comfortable with in cash, put all those guys in first, and then build up from there. And I think that, as you build up, you'll see spots where you're uncomfortable, spots where you can upgrade. And it won't be like, well, I have a few thousand left over. Let me just plug in the most expensive guy. I think one spot where it's okay to leave some money on the table is in short slate GPPs, like 2 or 3 game GPPs, where it's so important to have a unique lineup. Like you're costing yourself so much money by not even giving yourself a chance to get the outright win in a GPP. So by leaving a lot of money on the table or leaving some money on the table, you're more likely to have a contrarian lineup in those short slates. Question 7 is from Matt Swanson. He says, how do you deal with relatives who want to buy you Christmas presents when you don't need anything and you don't want them to waste time buying you junk? So it's my first instinct as well to do exactly what Matt said. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, but I really don't need anything. I don't want anything, please don't get me anything, blah, blah, blah. I used to do that all the time. And then I realized like, A, that's not the holiday spirit. And B, like people are offended. They really want to get you stuff. They really do. So I think the play is then to not ask them for things, but for experiences. So like people ask me, oh, what should I get your kid? And I always tell them, experiences, tickets to the aquarium, tickets to the zoo, take him somewhere, take him to Disney on Ice with you. I don't know, Sesame Street Live, whatever. Like he has enough things. He has enough toys. He doesn't need that. And like, it's the same for me. I don't need anything, but it's great to get experiences. Sixers game, go to a show, go to dinner, something like that, whatever. So I think once we start thinking of gifts is not material things, but as experiences, I think it becomes more enjoyable. Question 8 is from Fantasy Subs. In a 10-man tourney, are you more likely to play a cash team or a tournament team? Almost always the answer here for me is cash team, especially at low stakes where there won't be nearly as many people playing the optimal or something close to the optimal. I would just let other people kind of get weird and get wild and high variant in these situations. Now, if you're playing a ton of volume and you want to hedge some by having a leagues lineup, which has some correlation, and then another separate lineup that is kind of your head-to-head 50-50 lineup, I've done that. I think that's fine. But I think for most people listening to this, if you're playing a 10-man, It's likely soft enough where you can just play your best team, play the team that has the highest expectation, play your cash team in there, and you'll do just fine. Question 9 is from Doug Kidwell. He says, a lot of podcasts sell t-shirts. Any plans to ever have DFS Edge shirts available for sale? Maybe donate the profit to charity. Haven't really thought about it a lot, to be honest with you, Doug. I do think that it's kind of cheap and unauthentic to try to like exploit listeners by like selling them crap, at some like absurd markup. There's something that Howard Stern talked about before. Like, obviously he has millions and millions of insanely passionate fans like me, and he could have made a ton of money by selling Howard dolls and, whatever, kitschis or tchotchkes or whatever those things are, I mean, he could have made a fortune, but he decided not to, just to try to be like, more authentic. And I kind of agree with that. Now, that said, I do buy, like, I have so many Sam Hinkie t-shirts. I know people love to buy like concert t-shirts. So I don't know. It's definitely an idea. I'm not opposed to it, I guess. I do think that like, instead of charging people for content such as podcasts and stuff, I'd rather collect money from advertisers and sponsors, right? Like, I think people prefer that. I think the listeners prefer that. I don't know. You guys can tell me if not, but like, I think people are more willing to listen to an ad on a podcast rather than have to pay to hear it, right? Like, even if it's something nominal, like $5 a month or whatever, like you'd rather just hear an ad than have to pay. So in general, like, yeah, I'd rather, instead of trying to, create profit from the listener, I would rather try to create profit from company in the form of advertising or something like that. In general, I would say that like, media and content, it starts to turn bad when it gets too corporate. I think everybody can see that. So when it gets too commercialized, et cetera, it gets to be not as good. And I think most people understand that, but it's a fine line for sure. Question 10, and the last question we're going to do today, is from Mick Webb. He says, expand on this pants off sex expression, please. A few more examples of its correct usage would be good. And this is not rocket science, Mick Webb. It's not rocket science. It's exactly what it says. Here at Gender Labs, when we are engaging in intercourse, we need full mobility. We need to be limber. We need to be able to execute our game plan from both a schematic and a positional standpoint. And we can't do that in a pool. We can't do that in a movie theater, blah, blah, blah. We certainly can't do it with our pants on or our pants around the waist. So pants off sex just means the full experience, the optimal experience. And winning the four-man, the ultimate achievement, is the full experience. So yeah, no hidden meaning or anything. When we say pants off sex, that's actually what we mean, the full experience, pants off sex. All right. That is going to do it for this edition of the Solo Pod, aka Ask Adam, aka the Swallowcast. I'm not sure exactly when we are going to have the three-man pod because myself, Al, and Peter are all traveling to Miami for the DK Championship this weekend. So we'll let you guys know when we're going to have the three-man up. Either way, it will be up at some point, the Week 15 game-by-game breakdown. You can send questions anytime to @DFSEdge on Twitter. For Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.